When Sarah Lawson walked into the Willow Creek Bank in her worn jeans and faded flannel, the manager took one look and dismissed her on the spot. Her modest request for a $25,000 business loan was met with smirks, laughter, and a crumpled application. "Sweetheart," he said with a sneer, "this kind of thing is a big risk for a little lady like yourself. Maybe find a nice, simple hobby." What Tom Granger and his staff didn't know was that the quiet woman they were humiliating wasn't just any small-town dreamer. Sarah had a phone in her pocket, and one call would change everything. 7 minutes. That's all it took after Sarah stepped outside and made that call. 7 minutes before the sleek black SUV pulled up and everything at Willow Creek Bank changed forever. Stories like these, when they reach you, are a good reminder to stay informed. Remember to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happened next in this powerful tale of justice served. Seasons of hard work in a flannel shirt, soft and faded from countless washes. Her worn leather boots were clean but scuffed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was in her late 30s, with a kind face and eyes that had seen a lot but still held a gentle light. She approached the desk where a man sat, his attention fixed on his computer screen. This was Tom Granger, the branch manager. Sarah waited patiently. When he finally glanced up, his eyes barely registered her before flicking back to his monitor. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat, not bothering to hide his lack of interest. Sarah spoke softly, her voice clear but not loud. "Yes, sir. I'd like to ask about a small business loan. I have a plan for a local service, and I need about $25,000 to get it started." She held a neatly folded business plan in her hands, typed and carefully put together. Tom Granger didn't reach for it. He didn't even make eye contact again. Instead, a small dismissive smile played on his lips. He tapped a few keys on his keyboard, a little louder than necessary. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now laced with a tone that suggested she was wasting his valuable time. "We don't offer loans to just anyone with a pie-in-the-sky dream. We're a real bank, you understand? We deal with serious clients, established businesses." His words hung in the air, sharp and cold. Over by the teller windows, two women stopped their pretend work. One nudged the other, and they both smirked, their eyes flicking towards Sarah and then quickly away, sharing a silent, unkind joke. Behind a nearby filing cabinet, a young intern, barely out of high school, let out a poorly stifled laugh. He peeked around the edge, his face red, not from shame, but from trying to hold back more giggles. Sarah felt a familiar flush creep up her neck, but her face remained calm. She had hoped for better here in this small Texas town, but the sting of being judged by her clothes, by her quiet way of speaking, was an old, unwelcome companion. She had seen this look, heard this tone many times before. It was the look that said she didn't belong, that her ideas weren't worth listening to simply because she didn't fit their picture of success. The manager still hadn't looked at her again. He was already typing, dismissing her as easily as swatting a fly. The neatly prepared pages in her hand suddenly felt heavy, a testament to hours of work he would never even glance at. The quiet hum of the bank's air conditioning seemed to grow louder, filling the uncomfortable silence. This was exactly the kind of experience she feared others were facing. Stories like these, when they reach you, are a good reminder to stay informed. Remember to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this one. What Tom Granger and his staff didn't know, what no one in that Willow Creek branch knew, was anything at all about Sarah Lawson. They saw only the faded flannel and worn jeans, heard only the soft voice asking for a modest sum. They didn't see the sharp mind behind her quiet eyes, a mind that had once navigated the complex world of high finance, accounting in a city far from this dusty town. They didn't know that Sarah had left that world not because she couldn't handle it, but because she wanted something more, something real, something that could build communities instead of just numbers in a ledger. For the past few years, Sarah had been on a different kind of mission. Using a carefully managed trust, one she had built with her own hard-earned money and shrewd investments, she had been quietly, methodically acquiring small businesses across several rural counties. She looked for struggling stores, local services that needed a bit of help, a bit of belief to thrive again. She understood the heart of these small towns, the way one business could support many families. She wasn't a faceless corporation. She was a partner, someone who invested not just money, but also her time and her expertise. She preferred to stay in the background, letting the local managers she trusted take the credit. Her satisfaction came from seeing these businesses bloom, watching jobs return, and seeing hope rekindled in places that bigger banks often overlooked. The irony was thick in the air of the Willow Creek Bank. The very regional bank chain to which this branch belonged, the one Tom Granger felt so proud to represent, was now largely under her influence. Through a series of strategic acquisitions made by her trust, Sarah Lawson had recently become its newest majority investor. Her name was known in the corporate headquarters, spoken with respect in boardrooms, but her face? Her face was not on any posters. She didn't do grand photo opportunities or splashy press releases. She preferred to understand the businesses she invested in from the ground up, to see them as her customers did. This was why she was here in these clothes asking for this loan. No one in Willow Creek had ever connected the discreet, powerful investor Sarah Lawson with the quiet woman standing before them. They only saw what they expected to see, and their assumptions were about to teach them a very important lesson. Sarah hadn't just wandered into the Willow Creek Bank by chance. Her visit was carefully planned, a deliberate act of investigation. For weeks, her office had been receiving quiet, hesitant complaints. They came from women in various farming towns, female entrepreneurs who felt dismissed, disrespected, and unheard when they tried to secure funding or even basic banking services. These were not women asking for handouts. They were hardworking individuals with solid plans, often for businesses that were vital to their local communities. A new feed store, an expansion for an organic farm, a small workshop for artisanal goods. The stories were depressingly similar. Loan officers who wouldn't look them in the eye, who questioned their experience, or who suggested they come back with their husbands. Sarah, who had built her own success from the ground up, felt a deep connection to these women. She knew the courage it took to start a business, especially in places where resources were scarce and old attitudes died hard. So she had decided to see for herself. She chose the Willow Creek branch because several complaints had originated from this specific area. She wanted to experience their customer service firsthand, not as Sarah Lawson, the investor, but as an ordinary woman seeking help. She deliberately dressed in clothes that wouldn't announce wealth or status, the kind of clothes many hardworking people in these rural areas wore every day. The loan she asked for, $25,000, was modest but significant enough to require a proper review. It was a real test. She wanted to see if the system was fair, if ideas were valued over appearances, if a woman walking in off the street with a good plan would be treated with the same respect as a man in a tailored suit. She had hoped, truly hoped, that the complaints were isolated incidents, misunderstandings perhaps. But the cold reception from Tom Granger, the smirks from the tellers, the interns' laughter, it was all confirming her worst fears. The problem wasn't just a few bad apples. It seemed to be baked into the culture of the branch itself. Her simple request was turning into a clear window, showing her exactly what needed to change. It makes you wonder what goes on in other places, doesn't it? These kinds of attitudes can be anywhere. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. It's always interesting to see how far these stories travel. The air in the bank grew heavier with each passing moment. After Tom Granger's initial dismissal, his disdain seemed to solidify, infecting the other staff members. When Sarah, still polite, gently pushed her printed business plan across the desk again, hoping he might at least glance at it, he sighed dramatically. All right, he said, picking it up as if it were something distasteful. He flipped through the pages with exaggerated slowness, his lips curled in a permanent sneer. This is basic, he declared, tossing it back onto the desk. Very basic. Not much to go on here, is there? Sarah had spent weeks refining that plan, ensuring every projection was backed by solid research. It was concise, clear, and realistic, anything but basic. Then came the issue of her identification. She presented her valid driver's license. The senior teller, a woman with sharp features and an even sharper tone, was called over. She examined Sarah's ID for an uncomfortably long time, holding it up to the light, turning it over and over, as if expecting it to be a clever forgery. This address, is it current? She asked, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Sarah confirmed it was. The intern, emboldened by the manager's attitude, sauntered closer. He leaned over Tom's shoulder, peering at Sarah's application with a smirk. "25,000, he stage whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's this for, a bake sale?" He chuckled at his own joke, looking to Tom for approval, which he received in the form of a tight, unpleasant smile. Tom Granger then leaned back in his chair, a look of false concern on his face. "Look, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This kind of thing, well, it's a big risk for a little lady like yourself. Maybe you should ask your husband for help? Or find a nice, simple hobby." The word sweetheart landed like a slap. Just then, the bank door opened again, and a man in a crisp, expensive-looking suit strode in. He greeted Tom by his first name, his voice booming with confidence. Within minutes, without even a glance at any paperwork Sarah could see, Tom was approving a $200,000 line of credit for him, all smiles and hearty handshakes. The contrast was stark, a clear, ugly picture of the double standard at play. Sarah watched, her expression unreadable, the quiet tension inside her coiling tighter. She had seen enough. Tom Granger, having swiftly dealt with his preferred customer, turned back to Sarah, his patience clearly gone. He picked up her loan application, the one he'd barely read, and began to crumple it slowly in his hand. The sound of the paper crushing was loud in the suddenly quiet bank. "Look, ma'am," he said, his voice firming into a threat. "I think we're done here. This isn't going to happen. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you don't, I'll call security." He reached for the phone, his eyes cold and hard. The tellers watched with smug satisfaction. The intern puffed out his chest slightly, enjoying the drama. Sarah did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at Tom Granger, a profound stillness about her. As his fingers hovered over the keypad, she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. "Before you call security," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "may I make one phone call?" Tom paused, surprised by her composure. He probably expected tears or an argument or a pleading voice. This calm request threw him off. He grunted, a sound of grudging, dismissive allowance. "Fine. Make it quick." "Outside." Sarah nodded once. She turned and walked towards the entrance, her back straight. She didn't look at the smirking tellers or the gleeful intern. Once through the creaking door, she stepped a little way into the sunshine of the bank's small parking lot. She took her phone from her pocket, her movements unhurried. She scrolled through her contacts and pressed a number. The call connected almost immediately. "Hi, it's Sarah," she said into the phone, her voice still even and calm, though perhaps with a new edge of steel that only the listener on the other end would recognize. "I'm at the Willow Creek branch. You might want to get here. They've just denied me a loan again." She listened for a moment, then added, "Yes, pretty much as we suspected. I think it's time." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. The name Sarah Lawson, spoken into that phone, carried a power that no one inside the Willow Creek Bank could have possibly imagined. On the other end of that line, the name resonated with immediate and significant authority. Things were about to change very, very quickly. The 7 minutes that followed would feel like an eternity to some, and a shocking blur to others. Less than 7 minutes. That's all it took. Sarah stood quietly by the entrance, watching the dusty main street of Willow Creek. Inside, Tom Granger was likely congratulating himself on handling a difficult customer. The intern was probably recounting the bake sale joke to the tellers, who would laugh a little too loudly. Then a sleek black SUV, out of place on the quiet sunbaked street, turned smoothly into the bank's small parking lot. It moved with a silent authority, its tinted windows reflecting the midday sun. The vehicle came to a stop directly in front of the bank entrance, and the driver's side door opened. A woman emerged, stepping out with an air of command that was instantly palpable. She was impeccably dressed in a sharp business suit, her heels clicking decisively on the asphalt as she strode towards the bank. This was Linda Cortez, the president of the entire regional bank chain. Her expression was a mixture of anger and determination. She didn't pause or look around. She headed straight for the bank's entrance, pulling open the door with a force that made the old bell above it jingle sharply. Linda Cortez stormed into the bank, her eyes scanning the room. They landed on Sarah still standing calmly near the door. Recognition and a shared understanding passed between them in a fleeting glance. Then Linda's gaze swept over the stunned faces of the bank staff. Tom Granger, who had been lounging back in his chair, shot upright, his mouth falling slightly open. The tellers froze mid-transaction. The intern, who had been leaning against a counter, suddenly looked very small and very young. "What is going on here?" Linda Cortez demanded, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. She walked directly towards Sarah. Then she turned to face the bewildered staff, her eyes like chips of ice. "This," she announced, her voice ringing with authority as she gestured towards Sarah, still in her faded flannel and worn jeans, "is Sarah Lawson, our newest majority partner, and one of the most respected entrepreneurs in this state." The air in the room didn't just shift, it shattered. It was as if a bomb had gone off, but silently. The intern, who had been holding a styrofoam cup of coffee, let it slip from his nerveless fingers. Hot coffee splashed across the polished floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, complete stillness. Tom Granger's face, which had been ruddy with self-importance, drained of all color. He went from pale to a ghastly white, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The smirks on the tellers' faces vanished, replaced by masks of disbelief and fear. The reality of who they had just dismissed, who they had mocked and insulted, began to sink in, heavy and cold. Sarah Lawson. The name now echoed in their minds with a terrifying clarity. Sarah Lawson did not shout. She did not gloat. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a quiet, firm resolve. As Linda Cortez stood beside her, a silent pillar of support, Sarah looked directly at Tom Granger. His face was a mess of confusion and dawning panic. He started to stammer, "Ms. Lawson, I had no idea. I mean, if I'd known." Sarah raised a hand, a small, simple gesture that nonetheless stopped his words cold. "Tom," she said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable finality, "your behavior today was not just unprofessional. It was insulting, discriminatory, and completely out of alignment with this institution's values. What I look like, what I wear, has nothing to do with my character or my business proposals. You judged me before you even heard me. You belittled me. You dismissed me. And you made it clear that this branch under your management is not a welcoming place for everyone." She paused, letting her words sink in. The silence in the bank was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping of Tom's own heart, which he was sure everyone could hear. "Therefore," Sarah continued, her gaze unwavering, "you're terminated. Effective immediately. Please clear out your personal belongings. Someone from HR will be in touch regarding your final pay and severance, if any is deemed appropriate after a full review of your conduct." Tom sagged as if struck. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing to say. The authority in Sarah's quiet voice was absolute. She then turned her attention to the young intern, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him, and to the senior teller, who was now pale and trembling slightly. "As for you too," Sarah said, her tone still level, "I saw your behavior. I heard the comments. You have a choice. You may stay, if you're willing to undergo intensive equity, ethics, and customer service retraining. You will learn how to treat every single person who walks through that door with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. You've got 24 hours to decide if you are capable of that commitment and wish to remain employed here. Linda will have the details." The two employees nodded mutely, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a tiny flickering hope. Sarah had delivered the consequences, not with anger, but with a clear, unshakable sense of justice. The camera, if there were one, would linger on Sarah Lawson. After Tom Granger had been escorted out by a swiftly summoned security detail arranged by Linda, and after the shaken intern and teller had retreated to a back room to contemplate their futures, Sarah walked over to the very desk from which she had been so rudely dismissed just a short time before. Tom's nameplate was already gone. She sat down in the chair, the leather still warm. It felt different now, not a place of rejection, but a place of responsibility. She pulled her simple, neatly typed business plan, the one Tom had called basic, and crumpled from her bag. She smoothed out the worst of the wrinkles, a small, almost sad smile touching her lips. Linda Cortez placed a fresh stack of documents on the desk in front of her. At the top was a directive authorizing a full branch-wide audit of lending practices and customer service protocols for all locations under their bank's umbrella. Sarah picked up a pen. She paused for a moment, then adjusted the sleeves of her faded flannel shirt, a practical, familiar gesture. Then with a steady hand she signed her name, Sarah Lawson. She looked up at Linda, then around the quiet bank, now a space of possibility rather than prejudice. "From now on," Sarah said, her voice clear and firm, "for Linda and for any who might later hear of this day, this bank, all our banks, will serve people based on their ideas, their character, and their potential, not their appearance, not their gender, not who they know, or how much money they already have." Her eyes held a quiet power, the strength of someone who understood the weight of her words and the importance of the change she was setting in motion. She was not just a majority partner. She was a guardian of fairness, a quiet leader ready to transform an institution from the inside out, ensuring that no one else would ever be made to feel as small as she had been made to feel that very afternoon. The work was just beginning.